This week's question of the week, courtesy of Laura and Izzy's podcast, Drinking Stuff with Drinkstuff. Steve, what the hell is Genever? Well, so here we go. Let's dive into this. So first up, if you haven't listened to Laura and Izzy's podcast, they drop it every single Monday. You can watch it right here on YouTube. You can listen to it in your earbuds on Spotify, iTunes, probably other places, but don't worry about that. Go to the big two or watch it. Obviously watch it here on YouTube because it's more fun then. But every week they come up with a question. There's always a question that sort of kind of gets them. I'm kind of the resident sort of, not guru status, but I've got obviously 25 plus years of experience and knowledge in there, sort of floating around in there. So I try and help them out, try and answer those questions. So this week, what is Genever? I completely forget the cocktail they were making, but essentially to dumb this right down, Genever is obviously a gin. It was the original gin that comes from Holland. So it was where all the gin in the UK originally started from, way back in time, Dutch Genever. To get even more fun with this, have you ever heard of the term Dutch courage? That's what it kind of stems from. The Dutch soldiers used to have a little nip of that before they went into the battle during the 40 Years' War. How we found out about it was because obviously the Allies went to help the Dutch out in that war and kind of found the spirit and then brought it back to the UK, but then put our own little twist on it. So to dumb this right down, Genever, it is essentially, I call it a sort of like a malt wine based spirit, but it's essentially it's distilled from either corn, rye or malted barley, something like that. Whereas your gin, as we know it, is essentially distilled from anything. Now, the best way to describe that, it kind of, because that will kind of, when you think, let's take whiskey for instance, you know, whiskey is kind of obviously distilled from sort of grains and rye and all that sort of stuff. It kind of gives you a very different vibe than if you were making vodka or something like that. Now to dumb it right down, vodka is in the UK as we know it. It's essentially juniper flavoured vodka. Okay, it's nothing more technical than that. It is juniper flavoured vodka, whereas Genever is a bit different. It's kind of that malted kind of base spirit to it. Again, Dutch, back in those days, even gin, like our first gins in the UK, you know, going way back, hundreds of years ago, you know, didn't really have the amount of botanicals that we do now. So essentially, Genever was this malted base spirit, wine, whatever you want to call it, with juniper and maybe a kind of like a citrus note to it. Nothing else really going on. Whereas in the UK now we're up to like gins with like 20, 30, 40 different botanicals in them. So it's a very different thing, very different taste. You can still get Genevers. Bowls are the biggest one. We don't have a big Genever market in the UK. We've probably got 2 or 3 brands maybe that I can think of. But if you go to Holland, probably even Belgium, places like that to be fair, but Holland mainly, you will find probably more sort of especially homemade Genevers and that sort of stuff. Much like the gin market is in the UK, there will be Genevers over there. So that's essentially what Genever is. There is a bridge between Genever and London Dry in the UK. All right, and there's probably another bridge as well. We have distilled gin. Basically, London Dry, whatever comes off this still, so it's distilled. Whatever you've got in your pot, your distillation, whatever's distilled, the vapour that's collected, you can't add anything to that except water to bring it down to your desired ABV. Whereas distilled gin, you can add sugar, you can add flavours and all that sort of stuff. So London Dry gin is a protected kind of thing. It's a one pot kind of thing, nothing can be added to it. The bridge between London Dry and Genever essentially is what we call Old Tom gin. So Old Tom is essentially a sweetened version of a London Dry essentially. It's that step between English gin as we know it into Genever still, but Old Tom will be kind of a traditional vodka based as such, whereas Old Tom will still be that kind of rye grain malted sort of barley kind of sort of base to it. So I hope that's cleared that up. Your palates might not be ready for Genever. As I say, it's a very different type of thing. It's still got that juniper kind of lead flavour coming through it, but it's not essentially juniper flavoured vodka as you would think of as gins in the UK. So I hope that's answered that question. Gin gurus will go way more in depth than that. I'm not a gin guru, I'm a rum guru, you know. So hopefully that's helped you out. For next week's question, join me this time next week, whatever time that's coming out. See you soon.